Hello friends and welcome to my channel Iballdesigningdeveloper. So like you all know that in the previous video we have learned that what are maps in C++ and I hope you enjoyed that video and you have learned that what are maps and how to use them. So in this video I will be telling you about iterators in C++, that what are iterators, how to use them, and basically what's the purpose to use iterators in C++, because already we have covered up this topic in Python and I hope you understand that what are iterators in Python, and now we have to understand that what is iterators in C++, how to use them. So I hope you'll be enjoying this tutorial and this video as well from start. So if you enjoy this video and if you understand what are iterators in C++, so remember to hit a like to this video, and if you're new on this channel, want to see more videos like that, so remember to subscribe, and after subscribing hit notification bell as well, so you can get the notifications of all my coming up videos which I'll be uploading on this channel, and also share this video so more people can understand that what are iterators and how to use them in C++. So now what we are waiting for, let's move to computer screen and let's get started. Now here we are on the computer screen, and like I've told you in the start that today in this video I will be telling you about iterators, like what are iterators in C++, because already we have learned about iterators in Python, but now we have to understand if we are starting this thing with C++, so what's the difference in that, and like all the things are same or not. So if we talk about iterators, so basically iterators are used to access and iterate through elements of data structures, vectors, sets, etc. by pointing to them. It is called an iterator because iterating is the technical term for looping. To iterate through a vector, look at the following example. Normally if we talk about iterators, so basically iterators are used to access and iterate through elements of data structures like vector sets and etc. And if we talk about iterators, so normally this iterators is a technical term for looping. Like we have understand about loops, that what are loops, and we have also learned about different loops in C++ like for loop, and we have also understand about if loop, and then we have also understand about do while loop. So there are many different type of loops which you can use in C++ and Python. But if we talk about iterating, it is also a kind of, you can say, looping, or you can just say it is a technical term for looping, like this thing. So if you want to iterate through a vector, you have to look at this example which is created a vector here. So normally we have created a vector which is called as cars, and that will store strings. So here the vector value is being written, which is a vector keyword, you can say, and after that we have written our vector name, which is a string, and then we have given our vector name as cars here, so that we can add all the cars values, or you can say all the car strings here. So we have added some values in my string like Volvo, BMW, Ford, Mazda. So these are the string values which I have added in this vector, so that I can create these strings, and when I should be printing, I'll be getting the output. But I have to print that as well, because normally if I'm adding this thing and running, you will be not getting any output. You need to print this thing by using for loop. So that's why we'll be doing that moving forward. But if we understand that if we are creating a vector iterator, called it as vector string iterator it. So if I want to iterate this vector here, so for that I will be just using this thing which is called iterator it. It is, you can just say it is a statement which I am using here, because it is a technical term for looping. So I will be not using for loop to print this. I will be normally using this iterator it because it is a technical term for looping. So that's why when I will be using this thing, I will be getting it printed, but in a different way. If you want to loop through the vector with the iterator, you can use this for loop as well, in which you can use iterator value as well, and you can use loop value as well. And the loop value which I am using is for loop, so this will be considered as a loop, and in this for loop value I am using iterator, which is it. It is short term for iterator, or you can just say it is a short form of iterator which I am using here and then here as well, and then in the end here as well. So I'm iterating these all things with loop, and I'm getting these all things printed, but in a different way. And I'll be showing you that when I'm just printing this vector here with this string, and when I'm using iterator term for looping, so what output I'm getting, how I'm getting the output, and what's the difference between normal loop when I'm using and printing, and what is the difference between when I'm using technical term for looping, which is iterator, with for loop, how the output I'm getting printed when I'm using with iterating the function. If we talk about that, what is this example saying, or you can just say what this example is explaining here. So first we create a vector of strings to store the names of different car manufacturers. Then we create a vector iterator called it, that we will use to loop through the vector. Next, we use a for loop to loop through the vector with the iterator. The iterator, it points to the first element in the vector car.begin, and the loop continues as long it is not equal to car's end. The increment operator moves the iterator to the next element in the vector. The dereference operator accesses the element the iterator points to. So these are the things which I am getting. If you want to understand about the node, you can just learn this. The type of the iterator must match the type of data structure it should iterate through, string in our example, and this is the way you can use it here. And if we talk about that what is begin and end, this is a other type you can just use here to iterate any loop or iterate any function. So begin and end are functions that belong to data structure such as vector and list. They do not belong to the iterator itself. Instead, they are used with iterators to access and iterate through the elements of these data structures. Like I've already told you that this is another example to use iterate, or you can just say to iterate any function or iterate any loop. You cannot use it with vector and list because it is belong to data structure. And if we talk about that what are data structures, so vector and list are type of data structure, you can just say, but you cannot use with them because it is not belong to the iterator itself. You can use it to iterate the functions, but you cannot use it with iterator, and that's the difference between begin and end. If we talk about that what is begin here, so begin returns an iterator that points to the first element of the data structure, and returns an iterator that points to one position after the last element. To understand how they work, let's continue to use vectors as an example. Like in top, when we were just understanding about iterator, we were using vector as example. So here as well, when we are understanding begin and end function, so we need to use this same example of vectors so that you will be not confused with that, and you will be also getting all the things understand easily. So if we talk about that how we have created a vector, we have first of all written the vector name. After that, first of all we have written the vector keyword, and after that we have written our vector type, and then in the end we have written our vector name in which we have stored these 4 values of cars, and then we have iterated this value using iterator it, like at the top we have also used, and you need to add this semicolon 2 times in the center as well so that you can iterate your loop or iterate your function which you are using, and you can get the output. If you want to understand this begin example, so begin points to the first element in the vector index 0, which is Volvo. So when you will be printing these all things with index number, and when you will be printing this index 0, you will be getting the output as Volvo, because like I've told you in the previous videos as well, when you're using index number and when you are consider anything as value 0, so the first value written in string will be printed in the output, and that's why when I will be adding index as 0, so I will be getting this Volvo printed in my output. If you want to see the example, you can just see here I'm using this it, which is called as iterator. It is a short form of iterator, which is it equal to cars.begin, and begin is a function which we use to iterate any loop or iterate any function. To point to the second element BMW, you can write cars.begin plus 1 so that you can add this thing and you can get this BMW which is written in second printed, because when I'm using cars.begin, so it will be printing the value as Volvo because it will be considered as index 0. But when I'm using it with plus 1, so it will be considered as 0 plus 1, it's 1. So that's why when the value will be considered as 1, you will be getting this BMW printed in your output, because this value is considered as 1 in index number. If we talk about that how to point the second element, so to point the second element you can just use same value like here I'm using, and then of course that also means you can point to the third element with cars.begin plus 2, and that thing will be repeating again and again if you want to use it with different string values. Like if I'm adding this BMW here, I will be using plus 1 because 0 plus 1 it's 1, so you will be getting this BMW printed because in index value this BMW will be considered as 1. If we talk about this fourth, so I will be writing plus 2 because it will be considered as 2 value. So that's why when I will be printing 0 plus 2, it will be 2. So when you will be printing 2, you will be getting this 4 printed in the output, because in index number, this 4 is considered as 2. And that's the way to use these all things and to access elements and to print it in the output. If you want to see another example, you can just use it with AND example as well, and that's the same thing you can apply by using -1 values. And its difference between this -1 is that if I'm writing cars.n -1, so you will be getting the value printed here, which is, if I just show you, which is 4, because when I'm minusing 1 from 0, so I'm getting 4 printed because 1 is this Mazda because one is not this BMW. And why is that? Because I'm using dot end function, and end is printing all the things from the end, means from this thing it is printing, and when I'm using begin, it is printing things from here. So when I will be printing 0 in the AND function, you will be getting this Mazda printed, and when I'm printing 1 in this AND function, you will be getting this Ford printed, 2 BMW, and then when I'm printing 3, you will be getting Volvo printed. Not in begin, I'm talking about this AND which I'm using here. Here when you are writing dot end, normally you will be getting this this Mazda printed, because in AND this Mazda will be considered as 0 value. So like this you can just use it. I hope you understand that. And if you want to use auto keyword, so you can use auto keyword as well, because this auto keyword normally is available in C++ 11 and later version. If you're using any older version of C++ in any offline IDE, so you cannot use it. And it's not compulsory to use this auto keyword. I am just telling you because if we are just moving on to the later version of C++, or you can just say I am also using a latest version of C++ in which this auto keyword is supported, but it is an optional thing. If you want to use it, you can use it, but if you don't want to, you can just use begin and end keywords as well, so you can iterate through any loop. And if you want to understand what is for each loop and what is iterators, like if we just see the difference between them, so you can use a for each loop to just loop through elements of a data structure like this. And if we talk about that, when you are just reading the elements and you don't need to modify them, the for each loop is much simpler and cleaner than iterators. However, when you need to add, modify, remove elements during iteration, iterate in reverse or skip elements, you should use iterators there. So I can just use iterators, and normally we will be again using the example of vector so that you will be not confused with that. And if you want to loop any vector, you can just use this thing here, and you can just loop any vector through iterator and you can just get the print. If you want to just iterate in reverse, you can use begin and end with r begin and end, so that you can just reverse any of your iterator which you are using in your loops. And if you want to iterate through other data structure, you can use this example here, and you can use it with list or any other DQ or queues and any other thing. If you want to use it with set, DQ, map, and if you want to use it with lists, so you can just see here are the example to use them here with different structures which we have understand previously in the previous video. If you want to understand that how to use this sort function, so it takes iterators typically return, and it will be returning the value by begin and the end, and that's the thing. And I hope you understand how we are using this iterators here. Now we will be starting with the example which is this one here. So now we will be using iterators here. If you want to remove element during iteration, you have to iterate in reverse or skip element, you should use iterators there. So I will be using iterators now. I will be just copying this thing normally here, and I will be moving on to my Google Chrome, because you all know that previously on we were just using our Applet IDE to work with all the things. So I will be just removing the name, and here I will be writing iterators in C++. And what I'm going to do is I'll be just pressing enter, and here I will be removing it like this. So now we are getting all the things. I will be first of all adding here include IOStream, and now we are working with iterators. So I will be writing here not any header file, because I am not using any header file here. I will be normally writing here, you can just say vector we are using here, so we will be adding the vector header file now, and then I will be writing using namespace std. And when you are using iterator, so you don't need to add any header file there, but if you are using anything with your iterator, like if you're using vector, list, or if you're using queues or DQ, so you need to add their header files. Like I am using vector with iterator, so that's why I'm adding vector header file here. And then I will be adding init main here, which is another class which I'm using, and in this init main class I will be adding all my things, or you can just say all my vector files which I'm using here with iterator. So I will be pasting all these things, and I will be also returning the value as 0 so that I can get the output printed here. So I will be running this thing to check what output I'm getting. So if I'm printing this, I'm getting the output printed as Volvo, Ford and Mazda. Why I'm getting this output? Because like I've told you in the start as well, when you will be printing all these things, you will be getting this 3 outputs, because I'm using it with vector. If I'm using it with list, set or map, I will be also getting same things printed, but it will be a different way to print all these things if I'm using with vector, and if you're using the same thing with any different thing, like if you're using with list, so it will be a different way to print the list, and that's the way to use it. And now if you want to access any vector or axis, any list or any other thing. I have already told you in previous video. So we just need to understand if you want to iterate any loop, or you can just say if you want to iterate any function which I am using here like vector. So how you can do that, you can just use it in this way like we have understand here, but in the example as well when I was just showing you in the Word document. So I hope you understand how we are getting all the things printed, how we are using iteration, how we are applying those things and getting the output, and in index value the Volvo will be considered as 0, and that's really important thing to understand because I've already told you these things in previous video as well. I'm repeating this because in iteration all the things has been applied in a different way, not like for loop like when we were using in different things, like when we were using vectors, list and all that things, we were using for loop there. But when we are starting with iterator, so we are using it in a different way, like we are looping it with vector elements, and when we are looping it, so we are iterating all these values, and when we are using the iterator function, so we are getting a different output here like this. So if you understand that how we are using iterators in C++, so remember to hit a like to this video, and if you're new on this channel, want to see more videos like that, so remember to subscribe, and after subscribing hit notification bell so you can get the notifications of all my coming up videos which I'll be uploading on this channel. So now I'll be meeting in next tutorial here in C++ from start. So for today, goodbye.